Hi.
Hello again. We're on page 154,
54.
Pure Worship Book, and the subhead is?
Standards for Pure Worship Today. Okay.
Vivian's reading from the book. I am going to read from the screen.
Let us now consider some specific features of Ezekiel's vision. Imagine that we are joining Ezekiel on his tour of that impressive visionary temple. Keep in mind that we are not seeing the great spiritual temple. Rather, we are simply drawing lessons that apply to our worship today. What are some lessons that we might learn? Why all the measurements? As Ezekiel watches, the angelic angel with a copper appearance takes detailed measurements of the temple, including the walls, the gate, the guard chambers, the courtyard, and the altar. The sheer volume of detail can be overwhelming to the reader. Think, though, of the vital points we can gain from such detail. Jehovah thereby powerfully stresses the importance of his standards. It is he who sets them, not mere humans. Those who claim that it does not matter how God is worshipped are sadly mistaken. Furthermore, by measuring out the temple in detail, Jehovah provides assurance that the restoration of pure worship is an absolute certainty. The exact fulfillment of God's promise is as sure as those precise measurements. Ezekiel thus confirms that the restoration of pure worship in the last days is a sure thing.
Well, let's just admit something, that God has spent 9 chapters in this book of Ezekiel, the last 9 chapters of the book, describing something in what you confess is
detailed.
Is very detailed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about the temple, by the way. It's not just about pure worship, because pure worship is not what you have pictured in this vision.
Yeah, you have a building.
You have impure worship, and what God is willing to do about it by building the temple for you, so that your sins can be actually forgiven. A temple, by the way, that's not existed for the Jews for 2,000 years. He says he's going to rebuild. Mm-hmm. But these phrases they have in here, first of all, they've set up another level of interpretive problem when they call it a visionary temple, and admit that it's not the great spiritual temple that's pictured by Paul. You used to make the equation that it was, so now you've got a visionary temple and a spiritual temple, when all the time the volume of detail, which you talk about, the sheer volume of detail, which is overwhelming, or can be overwhelming to the reader, is telling you something that it's not a visionary temple. It's telling you it's a literal temple.
So they say, look at the details, but then disregard them. Don't believe that they're real details. So I certainly wouldn't want them to be my architect or builder if they don't want to look at the details and view them as real details.
And the truth is that you ignore the fact, or you make necessary the conclusion that God is not economical at all. He could have said what you just said, one paragraph, to sum up the whole thing, which is, this is all about my standards being high. Yeah. You've been belaboring this point now for several pages already, and you're still doing it. God is not economical in the way he writes when he spends 9 chapters describing something, which, like I said, is not just about a temple. It's about the distribution of a land.
And you're saying this is what it means when it doesn't say that. You're adding what you think the meaning of it is.
Sure.
It's not what it actually says. And it isn't about the last days or you.
Well, that was all under the subhead of standards for pure worship today. No, this is also about the future, by the way. That's another thing you're missing. Why all the measurements? Well, that's that paragraph. And then they get into the perimeter wall. Here's what they say about the perimeter wall, paragraph 17. As we have discussed, Ezekiel saw a wall around the entire, and they repeat this phrase, the entire visionary temple area. That feature was a strong reminder that God's people were to keep all religious uncleanness far away from pure worship, never contaminating God's house. They want us to read Ezekiel 43, which we will do in a minute. How we need the same counsel today, after God's people were released from the long centuries of spiritual captivity in Babylon the Great. Christ appointed his faithful and discreet slave in 1919. Here we go again. Especially since then, God's people have worked hard to get rid of false doctrines and practices mixed with idolatry and paganism. We're careful to keep spiritual uncleanness far away from pure worship. Further, we do not even conduct secular business in our kingdom halls, keeping such mundane matters separate from our worship. More to say about that in a minute. But let's read the text. Ezekiel 43, 7-9 is what they want us to read, but we'll also add a couple more verses from the same chapter.
Okay. 7 to
9.
7 to 9 says, He said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place for the soles of my feet, where I will dwell among the people of Israel forever. The house of Israel will no longer defile my holy name, they and their kings, by their spiritual prostitution and by the carcasses of their kings at their death, by putting their threshold next to my threshold and their doorpost beside my doorpost, with only a wall between me and them. They defile my holy name by the detestable things they did. So I exterminated them in my anger. But let them put their spiritual prostitution and the carcasses of their kings far away from me, and I will dwell among them forever.
So what do they want you to see in these verses? Abominations?
Yeah.
I will, what's the word, exterminate them?
Yeah.
ESV has, I have consumed them in my anger. Or do they want you to see the condition to make the point that, well, Israel could have had these blessings had they just cooperated?
Can you read from yours? It does mention spiritual here a couple times. Does it say spiritual in yours? I just wondered about the translation.
Which verse is spiritual?
Verse 7 talks about by their spiritual prostitution, and verse 9 has their spiritual prostitution. How does the ESV translate that?
They're whoring, that's all. They're whoring, and by their dead bodies of their kings at their high places. So it is all about real sins. I mean, sins that had actually happened, to a literal Israel. But I guess the thing that I see staring at me in the very last verse that they cite here, verse 9, is let them put away their whoring and the dead bodies of their kings far from me, and I will dwell in their midst forever.
Yeah.
Well, inasmuch as ever since the destruction of the temple, their whoring has been a thing of the past. That is, their gross idolatry has been put away. So even by your standards, that is the idea of a conditional covenant, even by your standard of a conditional covenant, they have cooperated. They have done what he says they must do here.
Yeah.
It won't be completely done until the millennium, the way that premillennialists see all of this. But also the carcasses, dead bodies of their kings, I mean, they don't have any kings. They're in what we now call the Gentile times. So even by your own logic, the point is they have done what he wanted them to do during the exile. They've cleaned up their act. But there's also other stuff in here, even in the verses they cite in 7 and 8. What's in there that you might not notice at all?
Well, he's saying the soles of my feet, my throne, the place for the soles of my feet is to dwell among the people of Israel and the house of Israel. So it's here. It's on the earth. It's not.
I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever. And the house of Israel shall no more defile my holy name.
Yeah.
That's a clean prediction.
Yeah.
You ignore it. So the reference to a feet, of course, well, we're used to them ignoring that one.
Well,
but there's other stuff here that they've completely missed, which is in the first couple of verses.
You want 1 and 2? Or?
Yeah, right in the New World Translation.
Then he led me to the gate that was facing east. There I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters, and the earth was illuminated by his glory.
So if you want to make this all about pure worship cannot happen until this happens. This is the first 2 verses of the chapter. The rest that you've taken out of context, is about not therefore today, but about the other side of the Lord coming in glory. And when he comes in glory, it's not symbolic. The whole earth is going to shine with his glory.
Yeah.
Every eye will see him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in this last paragraph, the one we're concentrating on here, I think the whole thing, put in context, is the whole temple vision and what follows it, namely the distribution of the land. What's going to happen in that new earth that's pictured in this vision, as you call it, a vision that I think is going to be fulfilled literally, but you can argue about that if you're Christians. The point is, the whole 9 chapters, though, from 40 to 48, shout, I would even say scream, that we are unclean.
Yeah.
Not we were unclean till 1919, but you are unclean, we are unclean right now until the Lord comes.
I mean, the whole purpose of the need for the temple was because they were unclean. So even if they had been worshiping God as he had instructed them, they would still have to go and offer sacrifices for sin.
Absolutely.
So that means you're not pure if you have to keep doing that.
Yeah.
But you would be doing what God wants you to do.
And then I nearly choked on the last sentence of that paragraph, right? Could you repeat that?
Further, we do not even conduct secular business in our kingdom halls, keeping such mundane matters separate from our worship. Yeah.
What can one say about that? You have built a business empire. You call it a religion, but you've built a business empire which is primarily real estate. You have billions of dollars of real estate.
Mm-hmm.
It's all those people who built those kingdom halls.
It doesn't belong to them.
They donated the materials for a great part, and they donated
their
all the labor.
Yeah.
And those kingdom halls do not belong to them, they belong to you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what can we call it? It's just
a mockery of really.
Yeah, the idea that we've kept ourselves clean from this kind of uncleanness. Yeah.
I mean, and you think in terms of witnesses tend to only give to them because they're unsure of, the world is in Satan's control. So whether it's religious or not, they don't give
to charities.
To charities where money could be used to help the needy. No, it's always help ourselves.
Or even needy Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah,
you
they
could
don't
have given
do that either.
These millions of dollars could have been distributed among your people, which is very clearly what happened in Israel. You had a responsibility to the poor, the defenseless, like the widows and orphans.
Yeah.
And in the New Testament, it's very clear that nobody had any need in the Jerusalem church in that first generation. That's not the case among Jehovah's Witnesses.
And we're not saying that individual witnesses don't sometimes help one another. Yes, I think that does happen, but it's not something that's you're reminded of to do or put in a place where that's what the congregation does. They organize and make sure the widows are taken care of, the poor, the disabled. These people tend to have to fend for themselves for their daily needs.
Yeah, it is said, by the way, that in the Church of Rome, just the Church of Rome, in the first 2 to 3 centuries, they had a support role. That is, people that they actually materially supported from the joint funds of the Church of Rome. Several thousand people were on that roll. I know in my years as an elder, there was no such role in our local congregation.
Yeah.
Yes, there were charitable acts, but they were done privately. And that's a great shame on your religion. But that's another subject, isn't it? We could talk endlessly about that. What is our link?
We're linking to Noor builds a business empire.
This is a commentary by Ray Franz on how Nathan Noor really is the mastermind behind this business empire that is now worth billions of dollars. See you next time.
Bye.